There it is, ABI Prism 377 DNA sequencer. This is a big old machine, about the size of a washing machine. And all it does is it sequences DNA. Probably weighs about 120, 140 pounds. Just going up next to it. We're going to take it apart. And this is the front panel. So pop open the front panel. You have some contacts that shut. Okay, this says danger high voltage. So basically how it was described to me is this machine is kind of like a very, very fancy electrophoresis machine. And you have a very, very high potential that is applied across a gel, and then what happens is the DNA is drawn through that gel. And the smaller chunks, you know, DNA comes in chunks, at least they break it up like that. And then the smaller chunks, it's kind of like a chromatograph. The smaller chunks, they end up going faster through the medium. So you have a gel, you know, like a gel is kind of sticky, and then you have the smaller chunks that travel faster, and the big chunks of DNA stay behind. And then once those chunks kind of get filtered out by size, they put it into a scanner. Cubby, you want to take apart a DNA sequencer? Let's take apart the DNA sequencer. So like I said, it has a scanner in it, and what I was told is it has a laser. This has got to have a laser inside it as well. So I brought some help. Here's Kyle. He's helping me out, taking apart the DNA sequencer. So I got one of the front panels off. I took one off myself. We're just kind of poking around inside there. That's what the DNA sequencer looks like with the front panel taken off. And here we're trying to get out that water plate. So there's a plate which is that big white thing in the front panel, and that keeps the entire electrophoresis gel at the same temperature. And that's really, really important, my dad said, that you have the electrophoresis gel a uniform temperature throughout. So they use water and they run it through this big, it's got to be an aluminum plate to conduct all the heat over. That's what it looks like on the underside. And that's the laser carriage. It has a mirror, a couple of mirrors. And that laser carriage, actually it's a sensor carriage, and the laser is just kind of set, it's fixed. So here goes Kyle. I already took out the high voltage power supply. You can see that on the bench beside me. And Kyle's taking off the rails. There are a couple of rails that, keep everything aligned. And then he takes out the linear slide. I'm trying to get to that laser power supply. There you go, Kyle. A way to completely mess up the order I had in my screwdriver box. But hey, whatever. So he takes out the sensor, and I'm going to present that to the camera. There you go, that's a sensor. And that's the thing that looks at and there's a linear actuator that slides that sensor back and forth. And here's a laser I took out. About that sensor, for you to know what base pairs you have, you need to prepare your sample first. So how a scientist might prepare a sample for DNA sequencing is first doing a PCR, a polymerase chain reaction, and that amplifies the DNA. once you amplify, you need to react it with fluorophores. So connect some fluorescent compounds to each corresponding base pair, and then once that base pair passes in front of the sensor, it will literally read off as green or red because the blue argon laser excites the fluorophore and it fluoresces in those colors. That's how you read the base pairs. Here I take out the laser power supply. So now that fan blower is exposed. We propped it up, and that's the regular power supply. That power supply goes to the motherboard, and we're kind of debating how to get it out. There goes the motherboard. And Kyle asks me, oh, what would you salvage off of this? And I start naming some parts. And that's the fan for the radiator. And now I'm off to get a drill bit. I'm trying to drill out the electrical panel from the opposite side. There are a bunch of standoffs that are basically riveted to the panel, and we needed to get a really long extender to undo some nuts. And there's the water heater. There's the radiator in my right hand, water heater in my left hand. And there's Kyle again. We voyage off to go get some sockets. We need to find a socket that can fit on those nuts. That electrical panel is mounted real deep inside, and I think I'm actually going to show that in a moment. It doesn't show up that well in the time lapse, but here I call my dad and I ask him where the converter is, the extender and the converter and everything, and basically he had his toolbox back in his car and I couldn't get into any of those tools that I needed. So now we're down in the basement trying to find just something that can work, something that could take those nuts off for the electrical panel. And we come back. Okay, so we come back and we didn't find those parts in the basement, so now we're in the garage, scrounging around for just something that can take those nuts off. They're very far inside. Here I get out the shop light. Found the extender, but no way to fit the extender to any of the sockets. So we go downstairs. So there I showed it for a moment. Didn't show up well in the time lapse. We did get a screwdriver that happened to have a square shank, and we used that. So now the electrical panel's out, and I'm just showing him some of the different parts. And there's all the tubing. The tubing that carries water around. That's a fan blower. And here's a water pump. That water pump has some rubber standoffs. Standoffs basically to provide vibrational damping. There you go. So here's a rundown of the things we got. Here's the motherboard. That's the electrical panel. Nice big electrical panel, 240 volts. That's the water pump. And that's the radiator. And then that's the big white thing under it. That's the, I guess, water plate. And then that's the water heater, a big aluminum block. It's got a resistive element inside it and a thermocouple. And That's that rail, that linear glide that the sensor is attached to, and that's the laser power supply. Power supply that runs off of 240 volts, and a key switch that turns the laser on and off. Here's the fan blower. It is a forced air cooled laser. An argon laser, which is like a light blue color. And that's what the inside of the DNA sequencer looks like. You notice that really, really big fat ribbon cable. That's probably the widest ribbon cable I've seen in my life. And that's the high voltage power supply. That does the electrophoresis, separates all the DNA chunks. And you notice it's a 5 kilovolt at 60 milliamp, and it just runs off of your standard 120 volts. And that's the power supply for the motherboard. You have one 24 volt rail, another 24 volt rail, and a 5 volt rail at different current capabilities. And that's just a standard timer they've mounted on it. And that's the sensor. That's the real important part of all this. That's the sensor, which is able to encode optical information into different nucleotides, the base pairs that constitute DNA. So they shine the laser, and the laser comes in through that end and it reflects about. Let's take a look at that laser. And that's the end that it comes out. That's where the forced air goes in. Really, really big laser. I think it said it's 500 milliwatts, and that's that fan blower that cools it. Really, really neat stuff we got out of this DNA sequencer. If you guys would like to see more content like this, you can please consider subscribing. I do have an entire other pile of things in my lab to take apart, so plenty of material for the future. I gotta get working on those Tektronix oscilloscopes as well. Well, thanks, and see you next time.